بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم تسليما كثيرا إلى يوم الدين. Today, inshallah, we're going to talk about two topics, the two subsections. The first one about the positions of Salah regarding the person who is sick or unable to stand. And the second is regarding making up past salawat. طيب. فصل للصلاة المفروضة 7 أحوال مرتبة تؤدى عليها 4 منها على الوجوب و3 على الاستحباب. So Salah has 7 positions. 4 of them are ordered by wujub. The order between them is obligatory, whereas the last 3 are they're recommended. We're going to detail what this means in a bit. أولها القيام بغير استناد. So the first one is standing without leaning, meaning standing without support, whether it is from a wall or a chair or another person, etc. The default is that one stands. Now, there are certain things that would allow you to let go of this obligation or to take the rukhsah of leaning on something. An example of this is people who are very old and simply cannot stand due to back problems, due to some kind of injury, not due to simply being tired. Another reason which would allow you to lean instead of standing is, for example, someone who has some sort of condition that he knows that if he stands straight, he will nullify his wudu in one way or another. That person is allowed to lean. Similarly, someone who has some kind of wound, some injury that's temporary, whether it's on his feet, the point here is not to specify specific types of injuries, but any reason that will lead you to be incapable of standing would allow you to lean. Al-istinad. So the second position that comes after this, and it comes by order. We said the first 4 positions are put in order in an obligatory sense, meaning someone who skips these steps, then his salah is invalid. So first we go from standing to leaning while standing. Someone who goes from standing straight to sitting on the floor, the salah would be invalid. The second one is leaning while standing. This leaning could be on a wall, on his side. It could be on a wall or pillar to his back. It could be on another person. The condition of this other person is that he has to be, or he or she has to be tahir, meaning it cannot be someone who is in a state of janaba or in a state of hayd. Any other person will do, even if he is not in a state of wudu. ثم الجلوس بغير استناد. So the third position is sitting down without leaning, meaning sitting down istiqlalan, sitting down independently. So just sitting on the floor without leaning on something. And the fourth position is sitting down while leaning on something, meaning sitting down while having a pillow to your back, or also sitting against the wall or sitting against a pillar in the masjid. This is the last position. These 4 must be done in order, or else the salah would be invalid. Now, there are many scenarios that would allow you to mix between them. For example, someone who is very old, but he is capable of standing in general. And we've seen this a lot. They pray the first rak'ah. By the time they get to almost doing sujood, they realize that they are very tired, and if they do sujood, then they will not be able to stand for the second rak'ah. This person must do sujood, and then as soon as he comes back from sujood, he's allowed to remain sitting down rather than going back up. So it doesn't have to be prayed in the same fashion the entire salah. So someone who loses capability to stand in the middle of the salah is allowed to remain sitting after coming up from the first sujood. طيب. The person who is capable of standing, however, he is not capable of doing ruku', or he's not capable of doing sujood, again, due to back problems or whatever reason he may have. He does ima, which is to point. What does this mean? It means the body parts in which he uses for ruku' and sujood, they must be pointed towards the floor as much as he can. If he can't go into a full ruku' in which his back is parallel to the floor, he must face down and point towards the floor with his face. Similarly in sujood, he points towards his face, points with his face and his hands towards the floor. Someone may also be incapable of doing sujood, but he is capable of sitting. So, between the two sajdas, there is a sitting. This person must do the ima, he must point towards sujood from the sitting position rather than the standing position. And this is just a one or two examples of the main scenarios in which you will mix between standing and not standing. طيب, what happens when someone is also incapable of sitting and he's capable of leaning and sitting while leaning? If he is incapable, hold on. فالترتيب بين هذه الأربعة على الوجوب. So the order between these four is obligatory إذا قدر على حالة منها. So if he's capable of doing any of them. If he's not capable, إذا صلى بحالة دونها تبطل الصلاة. So there's a mistake here. If he prays in a different fashion, then his salah is invalid. والثلاثة التي على الاستحباب. So what comes next? The three that are recommended. أن يصلي العاجز عن هذه الثلاثة المذكورة على جنبه الأيمن أو على شقه الأيمن. To pray on his right side. To lean on the floor with the right side of his body. After that comes leaning on the floor with the left side of his body. And the last one is to lie on his back. So if someone is capable of leaning on his right, however, he chooses to lean on his left, then his salah is invalid. This is what we mean when we say these three are recommended, meaning the order between them is not obligatory, rather it's recommended. As for the first four, though, the order between them must go as they were mentioned. Otherwise, the salah would be invalid. If he doesn't listen to the order in these three, his salah is not invalid. So, والاستناد الذي تبطل الصلاة. The leaning that would nullify the prayer. Last time, or technically 2 classes ago, we discussed the obligatory actions of prayer, and we said that the person doing takbirat al-ihram and the person reciting al-Fatiha must be standing. He's not allowed to do istinad. Istinad, leaning, is only for the person incapable. However, there is a distinction that must be made. The leaning that would make his salah invalid is the leaning that completely supports him. Meaning, if I am completely leaning on a wall to the extent that if that wall were removed, I would fall down, then my salah would be invalid. However, if there's a wall behind me, I'm just incapable of staying away from it, and some of my weight is on the wall. However, if the wall were removed, I would still be standing, then that's not considered leaning in this perspective, in our point of view, in our context. The leaning, the istinad that is talked about here is the istinad that is full support of the body, that prevents it from falling down. Again, also, if sometimes you are crowded between two people. If you're praying in a congregation, there's a person to your right and a person to your left, and they are whether you like it or not, lifting some of your weight. However, if these people were to, back off a bit and give you a little space, you would still be standing. That means your salah is not invalid. However, if I'm completely leaning on the person to my right, to the extent that if he goes into ruku', I'm going to fall down, then my salah is invalid. And this is talking about Takbirat al-Ihram and al-Fatiha. So I must be completely independent if capable during those two parts. What happens when I enter the surah, the second surah after al-Fatiha? After that, I can lean. However, I cannot sit. So he finishes al-Fatiha. There's a wall behind me. I'm not leaning on it. He finishes al-Fatiha, the Imam. Then I can lean on the wall behind me. However, I'm not allowed to sit. Why is this distinction made? Because if I were to sit, I would need to get up again to go into ruku'. And this is too much movement that is not part of the prayer, and it would invalidate the prayer. That's why I'm allowed to lean in the second surah, but not allowed to sit. والاستناد الذي تبطل به الصلاة صلاة القادر على تركه هو الذي يسقط بسقوطه. So the istinad, as we mentioned, that would nullify his prayer is the one that he would fall if that thing were to fall or move. وإن كان لا يسقط بسقوطه, if it does not fall, if he were not to fall when it falls, فهو مكروه. It's simply makruh, but the salah is valid. This is everything we just talked about is in the obligatory prayer. As for a nafila, he's allowed to sit, he's allowed to lean, he's allowed to pray while on a camel, he's allowed to pray while riding a horse or something. This is for nawafil. So it's narrated from the Prophet ﷺ, and even the Sahaba, it's very common. It was not very common, but it happened that sometimes they would pray the nawafil on camelback or on horseback or while sitting down. And the famous hadith, the Sahih hadith that is narrated in many books, including the Muwatta, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم صلاة أحدكم وهو جالس كنصف صلاته وهو قائم. That the prayer of one of you while he is sitting is like half of the prayer while he is standing. And this is talking about the nafila, meaning the person who is capable of standing, but he chooses to pray a nafila sitting down, then he receives half of the reward of the person standing. And so we know from this hadith that it is permissible to pray while sitting in a nafila. وأما النافلة فيجوز للقادر على القيام أن يصليها جالسا. It's permissible for someone who is capable of standing to pray it while sitting down. وله نصف أجر القائم. He has half of the reward of the person standing. ويجوز أن يدخلها جالسا. It's permissible for him to enter the salah sitting down. So while sitting down, he makes takbirat al-ihram without standing. ويقوم بعد ذلك. And then he is allowed to stand in the middle of the nafila. He can go from starting while sitting to standing. أو يدخلها قائما ويجلس بعد ذلك. Or start the nafila standing and then go into sitting down. ويقوم بعد ذلك. أو يدخلها قائما ويجلس بعد ذلك إلا أن يدخلها بنية القيام فيها فيمتنع جلوسه بعد ذلك. If he enters the nafila with the intention of standing the entire way, then he should not sit down. Then it would be impermissible for him to sit down. He should have the intention that he's going to sit in the prayer when he is making the intention of the prayer. Now, the person sitting in prayer, regardless of nafila or obligatory prayer, when he is sitting, it is recommended that he sits with his feet crossed and then go into the sitting position of sujood when he goes into sujood. So there is a known position of sitting down between the two sajdas, which is the one of tawarruk, which is what we discussed last time. He places his right foot upright with his toes facing the qibla and his left foot under his right foot. it is recommended to go into this position when the time of this position comes. However, during the time of the salah in which he would regularly be standing or doing ruku', then he should sit with his feet crossed. And also important bit of information, tiny bit of information that should be mentioned here, but is rather mentioned in the chapter of Imama, which we do not have in this text, is that the person sitting can only be an imam for the other people sitting. A person who sits on a chair or on a wall, he cannot be the imam of people standing. Whereas the opposite is true. The person standing can be an imam for someone sitting. And that is a summary of the positions of the prayer. And now, making up the missed prayers. We're going to speed through this, relatively speaking. فصل يجب قضاء ما في الذمة من الصلوات ولا يحل التفريط فيها ومن صلى كل يوم 5 أيام فليس بمفرط ويقضيها على نحو ما فاته إن كانت حضرية قضاها حضرية وإن كانت سفرية قضاها سفرية سواء كان حين القضاء في حضر أو سفر. So it is obligatory to make up the missed prayers regardless of what the reason was, whether he was forgetful, whether he was sleeping, whether he forgot them on, he left them on purpose. It is obligatory to make them up, and it is not permissible to ignore this or to be lazy with this and not make up enough. And according to Imam al-Akhdari, the person who makes up 5 days in one day, he is the person who is not lazy. And this is al-Akhdari's position, rahimahullah, and there are other positions in the school. Probably the strongest one being is that someone has to make up 2 days each day. So he prays the 5 obligatory prayers of that day and he makes up 10 other prayers. This is the person who has many. However, the person only has 3, then he obviously makes up only those 3. So he says, whoever makes up 5 days in a day is not a mufrat, is not a person who is a person who is basically doing what is expected of him. If he makes them up in the way that he missed them, meaning if the salah he missed was safariyah, meaning it was a travel prayer, which he was supposed to shorten and do jam', then he makes them up in that fashion. And even if he is no longer traveling. So if I'm traveling and I have a prayer, Dhuhr and Asr, which I was supposed to do while I was traveling, and then I arrive in Isha. I'm no longer traveling. I make those up, Dhuhr and Asr, as if I was traveling, even though I'm no longer traveling. Which says, سواء كان حين القضاء في حضر أو سفر. That's what he is saying here. والترتيب بين الحاضرتين وبين يسير الفوائد مع الحاضرة واجب. So when one is making up the prayers, there's a difference between يسير الفوائد and كثير الفوائد. A small amount of missed prayers and a large amount of missed prayers. What is the difference between them? It's the number 5. Whoever has 5 or less prayers to make up, then he has to pray them in order. However, if they are more than that, then he doesn't have to pray them in order, rather it becomes recommended. Also, the person who has 5 or less prayers to make up, he has to pray them in order, including the current prayer, even if he were to miss it. Meaning, I am currently in Maghrib time. Maghrib time has 10 minutes left. I have 3 prayers to make up. I must pray them before I pray Maghrib. Even if praying those 3 prayers would lead me to missing Maghrib, because it is a condition to pray them in order. If I have more than 5, if I have 10 prayers or 20 prayers to make up, then I put the current prayer as a priority. I pray Maghrib, I make sure I pray it on time, and then I make up my missed prayers. As for the Hanafis, then the limit they make is 6 prayers rather than 5, because they include Salat al-Witr as a wajib. whereas we include it as a sunnah mu'akkada. So 5 prayers is the difference between little and a lot. And the difference is that little prayers, they must be prayed in order, including order with the current prayer, whereas more than that, the order is only recommended. واجب مع الذكر واليسير 4 صلوات فأدنى. So it's a obligatory action with remembering. If someone forgets a prayer that he has to make up and then he prays Maghrib, then it is no longer a condition and he is allowed, he goes on as if he has done it correctly, because it is only a condition if you are remembering what you have to make up. وَلْيَسِيرُ أَرْبَعَةِ فَوَائِدٍ. So I said there was 5 prayers, and here is saying 4. What's the difference? So he's not different. He's not giving a different opinion. Rather, I was saying 5 or more is كثير الفوائد. 5 or more is a lot. Whereas here he is saying it's a greater than or equal to issue. So as soon as you reach 5, that's when it is that's when you start including it as a lot. Whereas someone who is phrasing it the different way, he might say anything less than 5, which is what he's not saying. Anything less than 5 does not include 5. So he's saying أربع صلوات فأدنى, saying less than or equal to 4 is when it's little, and it's called يسير الفوائد. So it's just a semantic distinction. It's not a real distinction. He's not giving a different opinion. 4 and less than that is يسير الفوائد, whereas I would say less than 5, but not including 5. So 4 and less than that is يسير الفوائد. It is a little amount, whereas 5 and greater than that is a lot. ومن كانت عليه 4 صلوات فأقل صلاها قبل الحاضرة. Whoever has 4 prayers or less, he prays them before the حاضرة. He prays them before the current prayer, which we just discussed. ولو خرج وقتها. So even if the prayer time ends, ويجوز القضاء في كل وقت لا يتنفل من عليه القضاء. So we discussed during the chapter of the prayer times that there are certain times which are impermissible for someone to pray. And I told you then that it is an exception. There is an exception made for missed prayers. So even after Asr, when you're not allowed to pray Nawafil, and even after Salat al-Subh, when you're not allowed to pray Nawafil, you're allowed to make up missed prayers then. And it's not وَلَا يتنفل. He should not do any Nawafil, because it is more important that he makes up his missed prayers. It is more important that he makes up his obligations than to fulfill a nafila, which is recommended. So he should fill his entire time with praying missed prayers rather than nawafil. وَلَا يَتَنَفَّلُ مَنْ عَلَيْهِ الْقَضَاء. The person who has missed up prayers to make, he does not do nawafil. وَلَا يُصَلِّ الضُّحَى. He does not pray duha, or qiyam Ramadan, or the qiyam of Ramadan, which is tarawih. وَلَا يَجُزُ لَهُ. So it's the only things that are permissible for him are الشفع والوتر والفجر. So الشفع والوتر, which is after Isha, as you know, and al-Fajr, which is the 2 rak'ahs before al-Subh, wal-Eidan, the 2 prayers of Eid, al-Khusuf, the prayer of, what do you call it in English? The prayer of the eclipse, wal-Istisqa, the prayer of asking for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for rain. These are the nawafil which he is allowed to do. ويجوز لمن عليه من قضاء أن يصلوا جماعة إذا استوت صلاتهم ومن نسى عدد ما عليه من القضاء صلى عددا لا يبقى معه شك. So it is a rule in the Maliki madhab that the person who is praying with an imam, they must be praying the same prayer, as opposed to the Shafi'is and some others, I assume. The Shafi'is, if you see someone praying Asr and you still haven't prayed Dhuhr, then you can pray Dhuhr behind him. Etc. And other prayers. This is just an example. In the Maliki madhab, the intention of the Imam must be the same as the intention of the Ma'mum, person behind him. So if someone's praying Dhuhr, this Dhuhr, and someone else is praying the Dhuhr of last week, they cannot pray together. What he's saying here is that people are allowed to pray in congregation for missed prayers if the prayer is equal, if it's the same prayer that they are making up. That's the only time when it is allowed. And whoever forgets, however much qada he has to do, وَمَنْ نَسَى عَدَدَ مَا عَلَيْهِ مِنْ قَضَاء, someone is uncertain if he has 5 prayers to make up or 6 prayers, then he has to pray to the extent that he is certain that he made it up. Similarly, someone who is not sure if he missed Dhuhr or he missed Asr, he has to pray, he has to make up both of them. He has to be certain that he has nothing left. Similarly, again, someone who is unsure of, let's say someone missed a lot of prayers. Someone was sinful in his teenage years, he didn't pray anything. He's unsure if he missed a year's worth of prayers, but he is certain that it does not exceed 2 years. Then he has to pray 2 years. Unless he has a valid estimate that it's below that. If I am unsure if it's 1 year or a year and a half or a year and 2/3, I have to pray whatever amount it takes until I am certain that I have made up all of them. Unfortunately, a lot of people fall into this situation, especially nowadays. If anything in the last, I think we're on the 18th lesson. If you guys thought anything in the last 18 lessons was difficult or a little hard to grasp, then get ready for sujood al-sahw. The only reason he includes it to this length is because sujood al-sahw, you either understand none of it or you understand all of it. When we talked about the rulings of water or the rulings of tayammum, he mentions the basics and then assumes you're going to reach the advanced masail in the next texts. When it comes to sujood al-sahw, you cannot divide it between basic and non-basic, because any missed information in sujood al-sahw would lead you to very probably praying it incorrectly. And that's why he has to include all of it from the very beginning. Which is why, as the pages, the text is 24 pages, and sujood al-sahw is 16 of them. Or sorry, it starts at 16, so it's 8 of them. 1/3 of the text is just sujood al-sahw. So, get ready. I don't think there was any questions. At least there wasn't any questions in class. If you guys have any questions now about either of these sections we covered today? Can you please tell in brief about the method of praying witr salah once again, please? The person who has many qada's left, he doesn't need to witr. So, no, he should do witr if he has many qada's left. We mentioned that witr is one of the exceptions. So the person who has many qada's, he does not do nawafil, and he does not pray duha or qiyam Ramadan. However, he does do a shaf' al-witr. And the shaf' al-witr is a sunnah mu'akkada. It is extremely disliked in the madhab for someone to leave them. And the person who leaves al-witr, his testimony is rejected in a court because he's considered someone of bad character. So that's the extent that that's why the exception is made for such prayers. Similarly, the 2 rak'ahs of al-fajr, they are a sunnah. They're not just nawafil, they're a sunnah, which were done by the Prophet throughout his entire life. That's why the exception is made. Now, the method of praying witr, it's simple. It's 1 rak'ah. It's 1 rak'ah and there's no qunut. There's no qunut in al-witr. Qunut is done in Salat al-Subh, as we discussed. And it is extremely recommended that he prays them after the 2 rak'ahs of al-shafa'. However, if he prays witr 1 rak'ah alone, then it fulfills what is asked of him. However, it is disliked. It is highly recommended to pray shafa' 2 rak'ahs with taslim and then pray al-witr 1 rak'ah. So we don't do the 3 rak'ahs in with 1 taslim, as some other madhab do. Like, I don't think there's any more questions. As always, you guys are free to ask questions to me personally if they come up later. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.